right, thank you, Deputy Smith. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may have a seat. Thank you very much. And I understand that you have received the verdict. I just want to say, first of all, to those who are in the audience, there has been a jury verdict reached. To everyone in attendance, and many of you have been here for quite some time, I will ask that there not be any emotional reactions and no disruptive outbursts. So at this point, I am going to ask the foreperson to please stand. Juror 5. And have you reached a verdict?
Yes, we have.
Was it unanimous?
Yes, it was.
Has the verdict been filed in or filled in and signed and dated by you?
Yes, it has.
And if you would please hand the verdict to Deputy Solomon. Thank you, Deputy Solomon, for handing that up. I'm going to ask counsel to approach and take a look at the verdict form. As to the verdict, it reads as follows. We, the jury, find as follows: malice murder. We find the defendant guilty. Count 2, felony murder. We find the defendant guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We find the defendant guilty. Count 4, concealing the death of another. We find the defendant guilty. Count 5, false report of a crime. We find the defendant guilty. Count 6, making a false statement. Count 7, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 8, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 9, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 10, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 11, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 12, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 13, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 14, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 15, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 16, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 17, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Count 18, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. And count 19, making a false statement. We find the defendant guilty. Okay. And is there anything further from the state? For your time, for your energy. This has been an important more than 2 weeks now that you've spent with the court, and your time and attention is deeply appreciated. I am going to release you. If anyone wants to speak with you about your deliberations and you want to, you may do so now. You're being released from the instructions. You're not under any obligation to speak with anyone about your experience, but you may do so if you choose to. I am ordering that there be no contact with the jurors in the courthouse or on the courthouse property. But I do release you at this point. Thank you. You're free to go.
Bureau Deputy.